This information by some very well-resourced groups, on the other hand, what you have left is disturbingly real. There are occasions where these UFOs are confirmed. They're tracked on radar, leave radiation behind. They're tangible on the one hand, and on the other hand, they behave in ways that totally defy our perception of physical laws. There are many people that presume that they are from some other galaxy or in some outer space context. However, those of you that have done serious research in this area know that the most competent researchers in this area, people like J. Allen Hynek, who passed away a few years ago, and Jacques Vallée and others, have come to the conclusion they're not from some other galaxy, they're from another dimension within our own. And so one of the things we want to talk about, that's strange talk, and we can glibly use cliches without really understanding what they mean, drawn either from science, mathematics, or even the Bible, and use them rather glibly. We want to cut through that a little bit and lay some foundation. So I want to talk a little bit about hyperspaces.
Could there be extraterrestrial life? I think we need to go back and sort of give due credence to the theologians that have gone before us. In other words, there were very serious theologians, very serious Christians that had no problem with this proposition that there could be extraterrestrials, and they had good reasons for doing so. It didn't harm the biblical text for them. It didn't endorse a different theory of creation other than what the Bible had in its pages. It didn't harm the atonement. It didn't harm the image of God, and it wasn't equated with demons. How did they think through this issue? And not fall prey to any of these fears.
Now that's the kind of insight that led to Dr. Einstein's solutions as he grappled with the nature of our reality. Most of you know that in 1905, he had a special theory of relativity in which length, mass, and velocity and time are relative to the velocity of the observers, the famous initial step of this. And it was a few years later that he generalized this theory, and he discovered that there really is no distinction between time and space. If you're really properly briefed, you will always speak of space-time. We don't do that. We're comfortable with three spatial dimensions and time. We treat them separately. But we know in modern science that we live in at least a four-dimensional continuum. And by the way, this has been confirmed 12 different ways to 5 decimal places and beyond. In fact, I understand recently an experiment confirmed it to 14 decimal places. So the point is, while we call it the theory of relativity, it's far more than a theory, it's well confirmed. Now, this leads us then into the whole area of hyperspaces. You and I would tend to be most comfortable at visualizing this as 3 spatial dimensions, length, width, and height, and time. But time itself is a physical property. And in particle physics today, if you're current in reading particle physics, you know that they have concluded that we actually live in 10 dimensions. The ancient Hebrew writers from Genesis chapter 1. But rather than do our homework in Genesis 1, we've spent billions of dollars on accelerators to deter it the hard way. But in any case, now the reason we're getting into this today is I think it's going to be useful for at least to consider the possibility that these UFOs, and more importantly, their occupants and whatever, are coming to us not from some far galaxy, although they seem to be posing as if they are, but they come from another dimension, and that has profound implications for you and I.
So in terms of myth number 1, it would go something like this. There would be people who would feel that if there was an extraterrestrial disclosure or event, that just sort of tanks the Bible. Why? Well, because the Bible doesn't mention extraterrestrials, and so there either can't be extraterrestrials or the Bible's wrong. Now that reasoning is, to be honest, completely incoherent. There are many things, so many things, that are real and that we know are real that aren't mentioned in the Bible. For instance, planets beyond Saturn. The Bible does mention Saturn in one place, but we know there are other planets beyond them. So does that make the Bible wrong because it didn't mention Pluto or Uranus? Well, of course not. How about places? China. The Bible doesn't talk about China, doesn't talk about Australia, doesn't talk about New Zealand, doesn't talk about North and South America. So if the Bible's silent on those things, that means the Bible's wrong. So why would we take that sort of thinking when it comes to extraterrestrials, the whole extraterrestrial question? Again, what I'm suggesting is we don't need to go there. We don't need to think this way. And frankly, we need to think better. We need to think coherently.
Only $1.
Claim to have seen not only things in the sky that they couldn't identify, again, UFOs, but also claiming to actually have been contacted by the occupants of those flying saucers, those UFOs, hence contact team movement. And what really sort of affected the way Christians thought about the whole UFO, the whole alien question in regard to the 50s and the 60s and the contact team movement was the messaging. The contactees, were supposedly told by extraterrestrials that, Jesus was one of them. Lots of Christian ideas were hijacked and sort of reformulated into space talk. Lots of New Age kind of thinking, at least that's the way we would term it today. And that really turned a lot of people off toward the idea of there being other worlds and extraterrestrial life. The alien abduction phenomenon that followed on the heels of the contactee phenomenon also did the same thing. People were actually physically harmed, or at least they alleged they had been harmed in these experiences where they were not only contacted by beings they thought were aliens, but the aliens would do all sorts of things to them. Some of them quite nasty, sexual violation, lots of things that in other contexts you would think are very overtly demonic, satanic even. This naturally led to Christians having a very low view of the whole question. Again, this whole phenomenon.
So God is not somebody who has lots of time. God is somebody who's outside the dimensionality of time altogether. And that's what Isaiah means when he says it, thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity. Now, if he has the technology to create us in the first place, does he have the technology to get a message to us? Of course. The problem is, how does he authenticate his message? How does he let us know that the message we possess is really from him and not some kind of contrivance or some kind of fraud? How many of you here in the audience believe that this is the Word of God? Wonderful. That's the politically correct response in this community. Outside, maybe not so, but here, okay. The question you need to ask yourself desperately is, how do you know? Because if we're correct, before this day's over, you're going to discover that we are being plunged into the greatest cosmic deception that will ever come upon the planet Earth.
Lastly, the whole ancient astronaut phenomena really deserves some attention here, because not only was the idea sort of popular that there were aliens and they had contacted some people and maybe abducted people and did awful things to them, but now, according to ancient astronaut theory, they had been here in antiquity and they'd raised up our great religious leaders, Muhammad and Jesus and Buddha. They were either taught by aliens or were the offspring of aliens or were aliens or something like that. Extraterrestrials had come here and built the pyramids. They'd given us Western civilization, even created humanity. All these narratives became, sort of part of the popular discourse in the 70s through books like Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Daniken or the works of Zecharia Sitchin. All of these things sort of run together. Contactee movement, alien abduction phenomenon, the ancient astronaut idea, to really making Christians predisposed to rejecting the whole question of whether there could be other worlds. Again, something in the Christian past that had been embraced. It was a consensus, and it was positive. Now, it didn't help that there were notable non-Christian authors and writers that actually agreed with the new Christian suspicion. People like Jacques Vallée, who became the model or the touch point for the French character, the French scientist in the movie Close Encounters, wrote a number of books, again, very negative toward these alleged alien phenomena. John Keel was another one. Operation Trojan Horse was his famous book. Again, these were not Christians, but they were very opposed, thought the whole alien question was deeply sinister, and they even used words like demonic for it. All of that sort of reinforced a very negative flavor in the church's mouth for this whole question of could there be other worlds.
God authenticates it by declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done. Only God has that capability, not angels, not any other created thing, only God himself. And he demonstrates that this is from him. How? By writing history before it happens. Now, we've talked a little bit about time. We've talked about multiple spaces, three-dimensional spaces, four-dimensional spaces. We've talked about that. Let's talk about time. You and I think of linear time. We have a tough time even thinking about two-dimensional or three-dimensional time. But let's imagine that this curve through three-dimensional space is a line that represents our timeline. Let's imagine some being is outside our dimensionality of time, and in our dimension of time, we have the past, the present, the future, as we experience it going through this line, right? Now, an analogy here would be like the parade that's going on right now through Roswell. If you're sitting on the curb watching these floats come around the corner, for you on that curb, that parade is a linear sequence of events. But if you are outside the plane of that parade, say in a helicopter above the parade, you can see the beginning at the end at the same instant. That's a clumsy analogy, but I think you get the idea. Now that means that even though for us it's past, present, and future, from someone in eternity who can watch the past, the present, and the future, it's in common, so to speak, for the one in eternity.
Now, for myself, I would say that it just doesn't have to be this way. We have, I think, to make a separation between the question of could there be other alien life forms out there and all of this other stuff, what people allege to out.
We happen to have in our possession an extraterrestrial message that's been authenticated. And there are two critical discoveries that changed my life. My background is engineering, and I've spent most of a 30-year career as a high technology executive. The thing that impressed me most during my life is the discovery that the Bible,
the mainstream media refuses to talk about this viral,
is an integrated message, even though it's written in 66 separate books by 40 different guys who didn't even know each other over a period of almost 2,000 years. It's an integrated message. I'm going to demonstrate that to you in a few moments. So the first point is that there's two discoveries, that it's an integrated message. The second thing we discover is that it has its origin from outside the dimensionality of time itself. And this is going to be very, very relevant because it describes the kinds of experiences that we see coming upon the planet Earth in some very unique ways. And so that's our goal today, to explore that a little bit.
Now, in the 20th century, there were a few other things that went on that today
on the blackboard, and it would start. The left end would be the beginning of something, the birth of a person, the founding of a nation, or some such thing, and the right end of the line might be the death of that person or the termination of that empire, or what have you. We've made timelines. How many of you have made timelines in school? Well, how many of you went to school? Okay, that's right. Well, because of this idea, when we encounter the concept of eternity, we jump to the model in our minds that eternity is sort of like a line that starts at infinity on the left and that goes to infinity on the right. That's a natural extrapolation from our own experience. Therefore, when we encounter something like God, we think of someone who has lots of time. And that turns out to be bad physics. Because God is not, see, time, we've learned from Einstein, is a physical property. And let's explore that a little bit, because that's important. We exist in more than 3 dimensions, and time itself is a physical property. Time, we know, varies with mass, acceleration, and gravity, just to name a few. And let me demonstrate that for you. If I had an atomic clock here on the platform and I raised it 1 meter, it would speed up by 1 part in 10 to the 16th. Not enough to adjust our personal schedules, obviously, but the point is predictable and measurable. Now, don't quarrel with the arithmetic. The point is that time is a physical property, and that has some profound implications for you and I. Albert Einstein summed it up very nicely. He said, people like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, the present, and the future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion.
A third myth that we should address is, would an ET reality really undermine the doctrines of the image of God and Christ's atonement? Now, you'll see this brought up a lot in the academic literature when it comes to the discussion of what an extraterrestrial reality would mean for mainstream religion. I would say that assumption, again, that an ET reality would undermine these ideas, is untrue in both cases. But let's take them in order. Let's talk about the image of God first. Now, to understand why ET doesn't undermine it, or wouldn't, we have to understand what the image means. And understanding what it means requires understanding what it doesn't mean at first. Now, if you think biblically, if you go back to Genesis 1:26, which is sort of the reference point for the image of God, God creating human beings, male and female in his image, you read through the whole narrative. What you get are certain characteristics of the image. Whatever it is, men and women both possess it equally. You don't get it incrementally. In other words, you either have it or you don't. It's what makes
especially trained in that way. But we can
coherently.
We have trouble going up in dimensions. If I start talking 4 or 5 dimensions, you and I will be at a loss because we're not specially trained in that way. But we can gain some insights by imagining something less than 3 and drawing some inferences. Let's imagine a world that has only 2 dimensions, like a plane. Let's imagine in our imagination that there are occupants with 2-dimensional occupants within that 2-dimensional plane. Now, if we came along as a 3-dimensional person and put our finger through that plane, what would the 2-dimensional people in that 2-dimensional world observe? A circle or a hole, yes, in a sense. Right, exactly. Let's take another example. If a 3-dimensional sphere is passing through that 2-dimensional universe, it will appear as a point that enlarges to a circle and then that reduces back to a point, because they would be perceiving a 2-dimensional slice of that 3-dimensional object passing through. Are we together? Now, let's assume we didn't have a circle, we had some other kind of an object, here represented such as a cube. If that cube tumbles through that space, not only will it start from a point and get big and then shrink, it will change shape as it goes through, and depending on how it's being cut by that plane. Are we together so far? There are many. Jacques Vallée, who's probably one of the most prominent published people in the UFO area, has suggested that these UFOs may be windows into another dimension more so than objects. And you and I have a tough time relating to that, but he may be very, very correct. Let's assume that we were trying to communicate a 3-dimensional object to a 2-dimensional world. We would be asking that 2-dimensional world to encounter things that they don't encounter in their experience. Our imaginations are generally limited to our own experiences. One way we could try to do it if we had a cube would be to project that 3-dimensional image into a 2-dimensional space and maybe rotate it. But this behavior in the 2-dimensional space would be bizarre to the 2-dimensional occupants in any case. Now, another way we could do that would be to take a 3-dimensional cube, say, and unravel it into 2 dimensions. And we would take that 2-dimensional cube and start to unfold it and lay it out flat. And that would be a way, possibly, to try to get a 2-dimensional being that we're communicating with to recognize what a 3-dimensional cube might be. But all of these are very imperfect because we're asking that 2-dimensional being in a 2-dimensional world to extend their concepts into a dimension, up into a region that they have no experience with. Now let's take another example, and that is there are such things as hypercubes, a four-dimensional cube. How do I represent a hypercube in the three dimensions? One way is to unravel it, and one suggestion is what's called a Hinton cube, which is an unraveled Hinton cube or a hypercube called a tesseract. And even you and I look at that and have a tough time trying to relate to a four-dimensional cube. You say, well, what practical use? Interestingly enough, Salvador Dali used that tesseract, a four-dimensional cube, in his famous painting of the crucifixion.
Now, you could, in theory, actually go to at least two passages in the New Testament and justify the idea that there are other worlds. For instance, in Hebrews 1:2, the ESV has, God has spoken to us by his Son, through whom he created the world, but the Greek word behind world in that translation is actually plural. It's ionos. So you could translate the verse, through whom he, God, created the worlds, again, through his Son, through Christ. Hebrews 11:3, you have the same word show up again. By faith, we understand that the universe, the ionos, which is plural, we could say, by faith, we understand that the worlds were created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are invisible. Now, I'm not suggesting this is how we should translate these verses. In Greek, you can have a plural noun that just sort of functions a different way other than to denote literal plurality. There are reasons why in that language a plural might show up, but you could actually translate these two verses to convey the idea that God has created other worlds. Now, that fact isn't something that would have escaped the early church. Again, in their discussion of other worlds, they knew about these things. But in our day, we seem to be totally unaware of them, and we seem to have been sucked in some cases, to this idea, again, a very incoherent idea, that if it isn't mentioned in the Bible, it can't be true. Again, that's a myth, and it's something we need to dispense with, not only for the question of could there be extraterrestrials, but also just generally in could there be all these other things as well.
To you, the great discovery in my life, and I hope it'll be in yours, is that that each book of the Bible is a key part of an integrated message. Every name, every number, every detail, even the numerical structure behind the text is there. It evidences skillful design. And as you discover that, you gain a whole different perspective and insight about what the Bible is really all about.
I'm also talking about alien abduction narratives. Again, whatever is happening to people or whatever they think is happening.
The Illuminati knows the answers, taking bone samples to clone rappers. But the artists in prison to silence their vision, genetic copies going home after. They look different, eyes shifted, smile missing, skin lifted. It's scientific. If they can't control you, they erase the old you. Get your duplication to enforce their message. They clone Gucci, clone Kodak, clone Eminem. He ain't raps his encore. Know that cloning rappers when they overdose to keep.
Understand something, family. Most of these celebrities are recycled. They recycle DNA and transfer consciousness. And breeding is important to them to keep their bloodlines strong. Majority of these big celebrities are related, and they don't want you to know that. Even all of the presidents are related, but that's a topic for another video.
Then you go a little further down here, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 13, but evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. You see, that's the progress of corruption. They'll grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. You know, no one is such a successful deceiver as the one who has deceived himself.
But because we hold beliefs beyond ourselves, when this spirit of citizenship is missing, no government program can replace it. When this spirit is present, Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm? The story goes on, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
And a few weeks later, one of our senators standing before the U.S. Senate and praying to the angel in the whirlwind to take charge and control of the future of this nation. The angel in the whirlwind is known in Masonic circles. It is Enoch, basically, turned into the most powerful angel in heaven, which is very much central to their occultic and mystical beliefs. That's why I started out saying words are powerful. When people say words, most of the time, especially when it comes from DC on down, it means something. And it may mean something what they call sato, under voice. They're saying something to somebody else out there, but they think the public is going to receive those words as having a different meaning. It's occultic. And so I thought I found something. So here's what I did. Did you know that in the ancient Zohar, the 700-year-old Zohar, which is one of the most important books of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, magic, he said, did you know that besides, their commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, that in a section called Viera section, which includes a subsection called Signs Heralding Mashiach, that is, the coming of the Messiah. And whenever he comes, they are going to accept a false Christ. Do you understand that? Why this was important to me was because what was ringing in the back of my mind was an even older prophecy, an 800-year-old prophecy that was also made by what I consider to be an occultic figure, a Catholic mystic. A man by the name of Malachi O'More Gare, also known more commonly to the Catholics, Father Malachi. And Father Malachi, 800 years ago, went to Rome to provide an update on his diocese to the Pope. And while he was there, something seized him, according to the story. Something came on him, and he began to write down what is now famously known as the Prophecy of the Popes, in which he listed every pope that would ever exist from the first to the last, beginning at Celestine II to what he called Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman. But look at what he said about Peter the Roman. He'll arrive during a time of tribulation, and then the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible judge will judge his people. So an 800-year-old Catholic saying almost exactly the same thing as 700-year-old Jewish mystics. They were prophesying the coming of their Messiah, who in our mind is the Antichrist. This guy is prophesying the last pope, the 112th pope. Well, guess what? Benedict XVI is the 111th pope. The very next pope, according to this prophecy, is Petrus Romanus. And last week, people were arrested who were plotting to assassinate the pope. At any moment, you could have the fulfillment of these pagan prophecies. Now, I don't put these on a par with the Bible, but why is this happening? Why did one culture, Jewish mystics, believe their Messiah would arrive, and a Catholic, and by the way, even some apocalyptic Catholics believe that the final pope will be the false prophet of apocalyptic literature, that the false prophet on this side will point the world's religious communities to the political figure on this side who is the Antichrist. And you're seeing the culmination of two, one 700 years old, one 800-year-old prophecies that are coming to pass at this very hour. Well, what happened then was a pattern for me began to emerge.
Of this video was very bad, and the audio was very difficult to hear, so I remastered the audio and tried to clean up the visuals a bit, because some of the information you're about to see has never been seen before.
Symbols are powerful. Did you know that? Especially to the occultists, symbols are very powerful. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about words and symbols. I want to talk to you about dates and all kinds of mysterious things like that. I want to qualify some of this in a moment. This is something for which I've been interviewed by U.S. congressmen, including Congressman Bob Ney, by U.S. senators, including U.S. Senator Rod Grams, by the History Channel, by dozens of radio and television shows, and even by members of the 33rd Degree Free Council themselves, and they have not refuted one time. I also believe that these forces can be powerful. Do you believe that we war against occultic forces? And do you believe that they also sometimes can be powerful? They can be persuasive. Timothy gives us that example where Moses withstood by the Egyptian magicians Jannes and Jambres. And Moses is sent by God to go and stand before Pharaoh, and he takes a rod with him, and he gives him miracles to support God's demand that he let his people go, and if he doesn't, this plague or that plague's going to happen. And yet here are these magicians in ancient Egypt who can mimic most of the miracles that are performed by God at the hand of Moses. They can be very powerful. We also learn in Revelation 13 that when the Antichrist and the beast appear, they will have the power to call fire down from out of heaven at their command. Occultic forces are in the world. They can be very powerful, and here is the mystery. They also seem to know something about times and dispensations, and that is quite a mystery. The example I give there is where Jesus went into the valley of Gadara, and the wild men of Gadara come running up out of the caves. These demoniacs come running out of the cave, and they say to Jesus, "What have we to do with thee, Jesus?"
Fact of our existence from the profane. If they discover us, conceal our real objective by profession of benevolence. If our real objective is perceived, pretend to disband and relinquish the whole thing, but assume another name and put forward new agents. When you hear the word Illuminati, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it this? Maybe this. Or how about this? Over the past few decades, our society has been inundated with symbols like these. They're everywhere, in TV, movies, commercials, and clothing. If you were to ask a random person on the street what this symbol means, you'll probably hear the word Illuminati used 9 times out of 10. It's become known as the Illuminati Eye and can be found everywhere from Taco Bell to soap.
Oh, Mr. Rothschild, do tell me how it feels to be the richest man in the world.
One has to be very clever to make a fortune these days.
Perhaps, but far more clever to keep it. Really? Well, I wish... Really? Well, I wish you'd tell me how to make money on the stock exchange. What's the recipe? Oh.
The origins of the all-seeing eye symbolism can be traced back to ancient Babylon, where it was believed to be the symbol used by Nimrod on the Tower of Babel. God was angry with Nimrod and his people for their transgressions against the laws of nature, so he decided to scatter them across the planet and confuse their speech. From the book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 9, quote, "Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." End quote. So, when God spread the people around the world, he also changed their language, so that communication between different cultures would become nearly impossible. Without a way of direct communication, these people were forced to use symbolism to convey their ideas. This is why we see the same exact symbols spread all over the world and found in every ancient culture. And this practice continues to this very day, where we see Luciferians using the all-seeing eye symbol as a way to reveal their true intentions without saying a word. And this is the reason why the all-seeing eye symbol was taken over by the Illuminati. However, in order to understand the truth about the Illuminati, we must first take a step back in time, all the way back to February 6, 1748, when one Adam Weishaupt was born. Weishaupt was orphaned as a young boy and was adopted by his godfather, who provided him with an extensive library of over 4,000 books. And it was here where he became intimately familiar with the teachings of ancient Babylon and the mystery religions. Weishaupt would go on to graduate from college with a doctorate in law at age 20, and 5 years later he would become a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt, Germany. Weishaupt became obsessed with the Luciferian ideology he learned from studying the ancient mystery teachings of Egypt and Babylon. He envisioned a world where traditional Christian values would be replaced with those of the old world, and he was not alone. Behind the scenes, he would gain support of many wealthy men, such as Mayer, Amschel, Rothschild. In 1773, Weishaupt and Rothschild had a secret meeting at the Rothschild's family home. The objective of this meeting was to, quote, discuss world revolution, end quote. Discuss world revolution. Interesting. I wonder if there were any revolutions in the world around that time that might have changed world history.
Why come ye hither, redcoat? Your mind what madness fills? In our valleys there is danger, and there's danger on our hills. Oh, hear ye not the singing of the bugle wild and free? And soon you'll know the ringing of the rifle from the tree.
As it turns out, our founding fathers were all well-known Freemasons with the exact same goals as Adam Weishaupt: to usher in a new golden age of enlightenment. But that's another video for another day. During his time as professor, Adam Weishaupt would meet one Maximilian von Mangelas, who would go on to play a very important role. Quote, behind Mangelas was Moses Mendelssohn, and behind Mendelssohn was the Jewish call, the Jewish International World Government, end quote. Around the year 1765, the Illuminati had established a Berlin literary review, quote, with the objective of propagating the pernicious doctrines of shallow Illuminism and, in that, the infancy of German literature. When this periodical had scarcely a rival to encounter, the influence it exerted was more extensive than can at present even be conceived, end quote. As the order of the Illuminati developed, so did its ambitions, which would eventually expand into a plot to first infiltrate Freemasonry, then spread to the governments and religions of the world. Using ancient magic from Babylonian traditions, the goal of the Illuminati was to usher in a, quote, golden age of enlightenment by systematically removing the Western foundations of Judeo-Christian values and replacing them with the teachings of Babylonian mystery schools. Its members took secret oaths, pledging an unyielding allegiance to the cause, and through a strict system of monthly reports, secret confessions, and mutual espionage, members were watched at all times to ensure total compliance. According to researcher Le Forestier, quote, Illuminism was just as much Masonry as the system of the Rose Cross, that of the Templars, or the crowd of Masonic French degrees, end quote. Identities were disguised and members used pseudonyms to avoid public backlash. Over the next 10 years, the Illuminati would grow in size and power and become seemingly unstoppable as they continued their reign of terror. And this would continue until one fateful day. On July 10th, 1785, Illuminati founder Adam Weishaupt was walking down the road with another member, a priest, Father Jacob Lang, when something incredible happened. Something that would go on to change the entire world and shape the very society we live in today. A bolt of lightning comes down from the sky and strikes the priest, Jacob Lang, killing him instantly. In what would seem like a freak accident, the townsfolk recovered the body and placed it in the chapel of St. Emmerin, where it was to be prepared for funeral activities. That was, until one of the monks found something strange hidden in his clothes. And what would read like a scene from a modern-day spy movie. The monks uncovered a list of Illuminati members and instruction sewn into a secret compartment in his clothes. These papers were quickly turned over to the counselor of the government of Upper Bavaria. After realizing what was happening, the authorities set up a series of raids across the country. More papers were found in a variety of places and on many people, such as judges and government officials. One official, Baron Mendel, the Chamberlain of the Elector, was found with an iron box filled with papers concerning the Illuminati. As a result of these raids and discoveries, Weishaupt was banished from Bavaria and the Order of the Illuminati was forced to disband. Or was it? Remember this quote from the beginning of the video? Conceal the very fact of our existence from the profane. If they discover us, conceal our real objective by profession of benevolence. If our real objective is perceived, pretend to disband and relinquish the whole thing. But assume another name and put forward new agents. At this point, the Illuminati were forced to go underground. They had no choice and had to, quote, hide in plain sight in order to survive. And that's where they remain today. Or so it would seem. The truth of the matter is that the world today is a direct result of the plans Weishaupt put into motion so long ago. There are hundreds of secret societies operating today, all with the same goal: worldwide Luciferianism, and to usher in the, quote, golden age of enlightenment. In order to truly understand why America is the way it is right now, you have to go back in time. You have to look a little deeper. This situation is far more complicated than they make it out to seem. So many people have asked me, why is this happening? How is it possible that one incident in Minneapolis can cause rioting all across the world? We're seeing riots in France, we're seeing riots in England, we're seeing riots all across Europe, and of course, all throughout the United States. So what is the reason for this? Well, before we get into this interview from 1984, I'm going to leave you with some words from Malcolm X. This was recorded in 1963.
The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The liberal is more deceitful, more hypocritical than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. And by winning the friendship and support of the Negro, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game that is constantly raging between the white liberals and the white conservatives. The American Negro is nothing but a political football, and the white liberals control this ball through tricks or tokenism, false promises of integration and civil rights. In this game of deceiving and using the American Negro, the white liberals have complete cooperation of the Negro civil rights leader, who sell our people out for a few crumbs of token recognition, token gains, token progress.
Now that you heard what Malcolm X has to say about this situation, let's take a look at this 1984 interview with Yuri Bezmenov. He was a defector from the KGB, and he has some insights as to what's going on today. Check this out.
Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov. Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was the, and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect.
What did you think about that? Was it accurate? Does it make sense now? If you haven't already done so, please leave a comment below and let us know what you think. And don't forget to hit that like button. And please share this video with everybody you know. And until next time. Imagine a world where nothing is random, and major events that happen worldwide were written down hundreds of years ago. What you're about to hear was recorded in 1967, and it perfectly describes the world we live in today.
What was the secret?
The all-seeing eye. Symbols of the guardians of the treasure.
Recorded by Myron C. Fagan, a famous Hollywood writer who rose through the ranks of the Hollywood elite, uncovering some nasty secrets along the way. He made it his life's work to expose the darkness that he personally saw with his own two eyes. This recording is a culmination of his life's work, and through a historical lens, he reveals what's been hiding in the shadows for hundreds of years. What you're about to hear is not conspiracy theory, rather is documented historical fact that holds up to the most rigid scrutiny. And without further ado, I bring you the Illuminati and the Council on Foreign Relations.
The question of how and why the Illuminati is the crux of the great conspiracy to destroy the sovereignty of the United States and the enslavement of the American people within a UN one-world dictatorship is a complete and unknown mystery to the vast majority of the American people. The reason for this unawareness of the frightening danger to our country and to the entire free world is simple. The masterminds behind this great conspiracy have absolute control of all of our mass communications media, especially television, the radio, the press, and Hollywood.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to two American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
We all know that our State Department, the Pentagon, and the White House have brazenly proclaimed that they have the right and the power to manage the news, to tell us not the truth, but what they want us to believe. They have seized that power on orders from their masters of the great conspiracy. And the objective is to brainwash the people into accepting the phony peace bait to transform the United States into an enslaved unit of the United Nations one world government. Let me clarify the meaning of the expression, "He is a liberal." The enemy meaning the one world conspirators, have seized upon that word liberal as a cover-up for their activities. It sounds so innocent and so humanitarian to be liberal. This satanic plot was launched back in the 1760s when it first came into existence under the name of the Illuminati. This Illuminati was organized by one Adam Weishaupt, born a Jew, who was converted to Catholicism and became a Catholic priest, and then, at the behest of the then newly organized House of Rothschild, defected and organized the Illuminati. Naturally, the Rothschilds financed that operation. And every war since then, beginning with the French Revolution, has been promoted by the Illuminati, operating under various names and guises. I say under various names and guises because after the Illuminati was exposed and became too notorious, Weishaupt and his co-conspirators began to operate under various other names. In the United States, immediately after World War I, they set up what they called the Council on Foreign Relations, commonly referred to as the CFR. And this CFR is actually the Illuminati in the United States. Perhaps the most vital directive in Weishaupt's plan was to obtain absolute control of the press, at that time the only mass communications media, to distribute information to the public, so that all news and information could be slanted, so that the masses could be convinced that a one-world government is the only solution to our many and varied problems. Now do you know who owns and controls our mass communications media? I'll tell you, practically all the movie lots in Hollywood is owned by the Lehmans, Kuhn Loeb and Company, Goldman Sachs, and other internationalist bankers. All the national radio and TV channels in the nation are owned and controlled by those same internationalist bankers. The same is true of every chain of metropolitan newspapers and magazines, also of the press wire services, such as Associated Press, United Press International, etc. The supposed heads of all those media are merely the fronts for the internationalist bankers, who in turn compose the hierarchy of the CFR, today's Illuminati in America. Now can you understand why the Pentagon's press agent Sylvester so brazenly proclaimed that the government has the right to lie to the people? What he really meant was that our CFR-controlled government had the power to lie to and be believed by the brainwashed American people. And let's again go back to the first days of the Illuminati. In 1785, the Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and closed the lodges of the Grand Orient. In 1786, they published all the details of the conspiracy. The English title of that publication is The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Copies of the entire conspiracy were sent to all the heads of church and state in Europe. But the power of the Illuminati, which was actually the power of the Rothschilds, was so great that this warning was ignored. Nevertheless, Illuminati became a dirty word, and it went underground. At the same time, Weishaupt ordered Illuminists to infiltrate into the lodges of Blue Masonry and form their own secret societies within all secret societies. Only Masons who proved themselves internationalists and those whose conduct proved they had defected from God were initiated into the Illuminati. Thenceforth, the conspirators donned the cloak of philanthropy and humanitarianism to conceal their revolutionary and subversive activities, and that all that secrecy
producers look at
emphasizes the power of the masterminds of the Illuminati, to prevent such terrible events of history from being taught in our schools. In 1834, the Italian revolutionary leader Giuseppe Mazzini was selected by the Illuminati to direct their revolutionary program throughout the world. He served in that capacity until he died in 1872. But some years before he died, Mazzini had enticed an American general named Albert Pike into the Illuminati. Pike was fascinated by the idea of a one-world government, and ultimately he became the head of this Luciferian conspiracy. Between 1859 and 1871, he, Pike, worked out a military blueprint for 3 world wars and various revolutions throughout the world, which he considered would forward the conspiracy to its final stage in the 20th century. Again, I remind that these conspirators were never concerned with immediate success. They always operated on a long-range view. Pike did most of his work in his home in Little Rock, Arkansas. But a few years later, when the Illuminati's lodges of the Grand Orient became suspect and repudiated because of Mazzini's revolutionary activities in Europe, Pike organized what he called the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. He set up 3 supreme councils, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, and the 3rd in Berlin, Germany. He had Mazzini establish 23 subordinate councils in strategic locations throughout the world. These have been the secret headquarters of the world revolutionary movement ever since. Long before Marconi invented radio, the scientists in the Illuminati had found the means for Pike and the heads of his councils to communicate secretly. It was the discovery of that secret that enabled intelligence officers to understand how apparently unrelated incidents, one such as the assassination of an Austrian prince at Sarajevo, took place simultaneously throughout the world, which developed into a war or a revolution. Pike's plan was as simple as it has proved effective. It called for communism, Nazism, political Zionism, and other international movements be organized and used to foment 3 global world wars and at least 2 major revolutions. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism in Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of atheistic communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. World War II, when and if necessary, was to be fomented by using the controversies between fascists and political Zionists. During this World War II, international communism was to be built up until it equaled in strength that of united Christendom. When it reached that point, it was to be contained and kept in check until required for the final social cataclysm. As we know now, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin put that exact policy into effect, and Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson continued that same exact policy. World War III is to be fomented by using the so-called controversies the agents of the Illuminati, operating under whatever new name, are now stirring up between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Muslim world. That war is to be directed in such a manner that all of Islam and political Zionism, Israel, will destroy each other, while at the same time the remaining nations, once more divided on this issue, will be forced to fight themselves into a state of complete exhaustion, physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. Now, can any thinking person doubt that the intrigue now going on in the Near, Middle, and Far East is designed to accomplish that satanic objective? Pike himself foretold all this in a statement he made to Mazzini on August 15, 1871. Pike stated that after World War III is ended, those who will inspire to undisputed world domination will provoke the greatest social cataclysm the world has ever known. Quoting his own words, taken from the letter he wrote to Mazzini, and which letter is now catalogued in the British Museum in London, England, he said, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the people forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, and anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out into public view, a manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time." When Mazzini died in 1872, Pike made another Italian revolutionary leader named Adrian Lemmy his successor. Lemmy, in turn, was succeeded by Lenin and Trotsky, then by Stalin. The revolutionary activities of all those men were financed by British, French, German, and American international bankers, all of them dominated by the House of Rothschild. We are supposed to believe that the international bankers of today, like the money changers of Christ's day, are only the tools or agents of the great conspiracy, but actually they are the masterminds behind all of it. While the general public has been brainwashed by all the mass communications media into believing that communism is a movement of the so-called workers, the actual fact is that both British and American intelligence officers have authentic documentary evidence that international liberals operating through their international banking houses, particularly the House of Rothschild, have financed both sides in every war and revolution since 1776. Those who today comprise the conspiracy, the CFR in the United States, direct our governments, whom they hold in usury through such methods as the Federal Reserve System in America, to fight wars such as Vietnam, created by the United Nations, so as to further Pike's Illuminati plans to bring the world to that stage of the conspiracy when atheistic communism and the whole of Christianity can be forced into an all-out Third World War within each remaining nation, as well as on an international scale. Now let me show you how our federal government and the American people have been sucked into the one-world takeover plot of the Illuminati Great Conspiracy. And always bear in mind that the United Nations was created to become the housing for that one-world so-called liberal conspiracy.
I am here to tell you today that your feelings are valid. Your trauma...
The real foundations of the plot for the takeover of the United States were laid during the period of our Civil War. Not that Weishaupt and the earlier masterminds had ever overlooked the New World. Weishaupt had his agents planted over here as far back as the Revolutionary War. But George Washington was more than a match for them. It was during the Civil War that the conspirators launched their first concrete efforts. We know that Judah Benjamin, chief advisor of Jefferson Davis, was a Rothschild agent. We also know that there were Rothschild agents planted in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet who tried to sell him into a financial dealing with the House of Rothschild. But old Abe saw through the scheme and bluntly rejected it, thereby incurring the undying enmity of the Rothschilds. Investigation of the assassination of Lincoln revealed that the assassin, Booth, was a member of a secret conspiratorial group. Because there were a number of highly important government officials involved, the name of the group was never revealed, and it became a mystery, exactly as the assassination of Jack Kennedy still is a mystery. Anyway, the ending of the Civil War destroyed, temporarily, all chances of the House of Rothschild to get a clutch on our money system, such as they had acquired in Britain and other nations in Europe. I say temporarily because the Rothschilds and the masterminds of the conspiracy never quit. So they had to start from scratch, but they lost no time in getting started. Shortly after the Civil War, a young immigrant who called himself Jacob H. Schiff arrived in New York. Jacob was a young man with a mission for the House of Rothschild. Jacob was the son of a rabbi, born in one of Rothschild's houses in Frankfurt, Germany. I won't go deeply into his background. The important point is that Rothschild recognized in him not only a potential money wizard, but more important, he also saw the latent Machiavellian qualities in Jacob that could, as it did, make him an invaluable functionary in the great one-world conspiracy. After a comparatively brief training period in the Rothschilds' London bank, Jacob left for America with instructions to buy into a banking house, which was to be the springboard to acquire control of the money system of the United States. Actually, Jacob came here to carry out 4 specific assignments. Number 1, and most important, was to acquire control of America's money system. Number 2, find desirable men who, for a price, would be willing to serve as stooges for the great conspiracy and promote them into high places in our federal government, our Congress, in the U.S. Supreme Court, and all federal agencies. Number 3, create minority group strife throughout the nations, particularly between whites and blacks. Number 4, create a movement to destroy religion in the United States, but Christianity to be the chief target. The headquarters of the great conspiracy in the late 1700s was in Frankfurt, Germany, where the House of Rothschild had been established by Mayer Anschelm, who adopted the Rothschild name and linked together other international financiers who had literally sold their souls to the devil. After the Bavarian government's exposure in 1786, the conspirators moved their headquarters to Switzerland, then to London. Since World War II, after Jacob Schiff, the Rothschilds' boy in America, died, the headquarters of the American branch has been in the Harold Pratt Building, New York, and the Rockefellers, originally protégés of Schiff, have taken over the manipulation of finances in America for the Illuminati. In the final phases of the conspiracy, the one-world government will consist of the king dictator, head of the United Nations, the CFR, and a few billionaires, economists, and scientists who have proved their devotion to the great conspiracy. All others are to be integrated into a vast conglomeration of mongrelized humanity, actually slaves.
What you just heard was a very small piece of that recording. The full recording is well over 2 hours in length and is widely available online. Just Google Myron Fagan CFR or Myron Fagan Illuminati and you can find several versions of it. Please leave a comment below and tell us what you think about this. And also, don't forget to hit that like button. Until next time, thank you all for watching. God bless you all. In this video, we're going to examine the leaked U.S. military document FM 3-39.40, otherwise known as the Field Manual for Internment and Resettlement Operations for U.S. Citizens. The official U.S. military documents we are about to see were highly classified until 2013 when they were leaked to the public. In fact, if you look at the bottom of the cover page, you'll see just how secret this document was intended to be. Destruction notice. Destroy by any method that will prevent disclosure of content or reconstruction of the document. By this statement alone, it's obvious that we were never supposed to see what's inside. And that being said, let's take a look inside and see what we can find. Now, this document is 326 pages long, and we definitely don't have time to look at every single page. So I'll just go over some of the most relevant content. Feel free to read this document for yourself. There's a link to the full document in the description below. Alright, so keep in mind that this document was not just written for overseas operations. It clearly outlines internment operations on U.S. soil and with U.S. citizens. On page 38, quote, support to civil support operations. Civil support is the DoD support to U.S. civil authorities for domestic emergencies and for designated law enforcement and other activities. Civil support includes operations that address the consequences of natural or man-made disasters, accidents, terrorist attacks, and incidents in the U.S. and its territories. The internment relocation tasks performed in support of civil support operations are similar to those during combat operations, but the techniques and procedures are modified based on the special OE associated with operating within U.S. territory and according to the categories of individuals, primarily DCs. In this document, DC stands for Dislocated Civilian, to be housed in internment relocation facilities. During long-term internment relocation operations, state and federal agencies will operate within and around internment relocation facilities within the scope of their capabilities and identified role. Military police commanders must closely coordinate and synchronize their efforts with them, especially in cases where civil authority and capabilities have broken down or been destroyed. Not only that, on page 146, it details the identification procedures of new prisoners, and that includes taking their social security numbers. Quote, Identification 716. Individual identification photographs are taken of all prisoners. The prisoner's last name, first name, and middle initial are placed on the first line of a name board, and the prisoner's social security number is placed on the second line. A prisoner registration number may be added on the third line. 2 front and 2 profile pictures are taken of the prisoner. Fingerprints are obtained according to AR 190-47. Now that we've established that these operations were not only designed for overseas, but also designed for U.S. citizens on U.S. soil, would it surprise you to see that the United Nations is also involved in this? Page 23. Agencies concerned with internment and resettlement. External government involvement in IR missions, and IR means internment and resettlement, is a fact of life for military police organizations. Some government and government-sponsored entities that may be involved in IR missions include international agencies, the United Nations, International Committee of the Red Cross, International Organization of Migration, U.S. agencies, local U.S. Embassy, Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, otherwise known as FEMA. It goes into more detail about the United Nations in Chapter 1-47. The UN is involved in the entire spectrum of humanitarian assistance operations, from suffering prevention to relief operations. Typically, UN relief agencies establish independent networks to execute their humanitarian relief operations. The UN system delegates as much as possible to the agency's elements located in the field. Supervisory and support networks are traced from those field officers back to UN headquarters. Military planners must familiarize themselves with the UN objectives so that these UN objectives are considered in planning and executing military operations. So basically, the UN is there every step of the way, and these camps must be formulated around UN policies, according to this document. Now, let's go to page 56, where it goes into detail about psychological operations, or PSYOPs. The supporting IR PSYOP team has 2 missions that reduce the need to divert military police assets to maintain security in the IR facility. So basically, psychological operations are deployed in order to manipulate their detainees and make them more passive. And it goes into more detail. Quote, the PSYOP team develops PSYOP products that are designed to pacify and acclimate detainees or DCs to accept U.S. IR facility authority and regulations. PSYOP teams gain the cooperation of detainees or DCs to reduce the number of guards needed, identifies malcontents, trained agitators, and political leaders within the facility who may try to organize resistance or create disturbances, develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes. Did you catch that? Develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes, otherwise known as brainwashing. Now, let's move on to page 84, where it talks about medical support. And this is where it starts to get a little scary if you take into account the whole COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, medical personnel are required to identify, treat, and document existing medical conditions and injuries of detainees. Commanders must consider the following when establishing medical care at the internment facility. A credentialed healthcare professional examines detainees monthly and records their weight on a DA Form 2664-R. The detainee reporting system requires weight data from medical community. The general health of detainees, their nutrition and cleanliness are monitored during inspections. The detainees are examined for contagious diseases, especially tuberculosis, lice, louse-borne diseases, human immunodeficiency virus, which is HIV, and STDs. Now, COVID-19 would definitely fall into this category. It goes on to say, quote, all medical treatment facilities must provide immunizations for and isolation of detainees with communicable diseases. Again, COVID-19 falls into this category. So basically what they're saying here is these facilities can be turned into a military quarantine with forced immunizations. Let's continue reading. Detainees who require a high level of care are transferred to military or civilian medical installations where the required treatment is available. Military police escort detainees to medical treatment facilities and remain with them until medical examinations are complete. So if you're really sick, they might send you to a hospital. However, you will have military police escorting you there and back. Alright, let's continue on. On page 115, it describes the serial number given to each detainee. Quote, internment serial numbers. The ISN, or internment serial number, is the DoD mandated identification number used to account for and track detainees. Once an ISN is assigned, it is used on all documentation, including medical records. The ISN is generated by the Detainee Reporting System. The Detainee Reporting System is the only approved system for maintaining detainee accountability. It is the central data point system used for reporting to the national level and sharing detainee information with other authorized agencies. Here is a nice diagram showing what the ISN is comprised of. Now, some people might say that these camps are friendly in nature and will be used as some sort of humanitarian camp to help people in need. Well, if it's a humanitarian camp, why would they need to use deadly force on people who try to escape? Page 238, quote, Level 5, deadly force, used as a last resort when all lesser means have failed or would be impractical. Used to prevent death or serious injury to self or others, to prevent the theft, damage, or destruction of resources vital to national security or dangerous to other, or, and here's the big one, to terminate an active escape attempt. So basically, deadly force is authorized to stop an escape attempt. That's everything we need to know right there. They also go into detail about how these camps should be laid out. There's many diagrams in this document, and we're going to take a look at this one right here. This diagram shows 3 rows of barbed wire fence, 25 guard towers, and a quick reaction force. Now, it should be obvious to anybody watching this that these camps are not humanitarian relief centers, but rather prisons. Prisons meant for large populations of US citizens. And this video just scratched the surface of this nearly 400-page document. What do you think about this? What are your thoughts on this document? Please leave a comment below and tell us what you think. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that like button. And until next time, thank you all for watching, and God bless you all.
Nazi. Someone is trying to make you believe the Illuminati themselves have returned to Rome.
Because only the government and the Illuminati have access to Antarctica.
By the way, the Illuminati is real.
The Illuminati is one of the world's most well-known secret societies.
Most people believe that they still operate today under various names, groups, and organizations. But is this truth or just a conspiracy theory? In this End Times Productions special report, we will show you some very strange photographs from the infamous 1972 Rothschild Ball held outside Paris, France, and let you decide if this is actual evidence of Illuminati activity or just some rich people playing dress-up.
Do tell me how it feels to be the richest man in the world.
One has to be very clever to make a fortune these days.
Perhaps, but far more clever to keep it.
The pictures you're about to see are from the December 12th, 1972 infamous Rothschild party held by Baroness Marie Helene de Rothschild. She organized this, quote, surrealist-themed ball for an intriguing mix of politicians, bankers, artists, and celebrities at the Château de Ferrières, one of the Rothschild chateaux located about 15 miles outside of Paris, France. The invitations read, quote, black tie, long dresses, surrealist heads, and were written backward. According to ancient occult rituals, the transposition of letters indicates the presence of the demonic. As the guests arrived, a series of floodlights were activated, making the chateau appear as if it was on fire. Servants were dressed as cats and lined up along the main staircase. Guests were greeted with a maze of cobwebs, and helpful cats were guiding lost guests to their tables. Dinner plates were covered in fur. The dining tables were covered with plastic baby dolls and taxidermied turtles. The menu included sirloin, soup described as extra lucid, as well as goat's cheese roasted in post-coital sadness. For dessert, a nude woman made entirely of sugar laid on beds of roses. This, however, is where things start to get even more bizarre. Famous painter Salvador Dali, who was in attendance, designed some of the costumes, but didn't wear one himself for some reason. Marie Helene Rothschild wore a giant stag's head adorned with real diamonds. Unfortunately, the events that transpired behind those walls and in the surrounding forest of the chateau that fateful night remain a mystery to this very day.
That's a mystery.
The website allthingsinteresting.com had this to say about the event. Quote, some claim that the ball was full of Freemason and Illuminati imagery, such as the chateau's black and white checkered floors. It's actually true that checkered floors are symbolic of the Freemasons, but the order traces this symbol back to ancient Egypt, where it represented the good and evil duality of life. As for the maze that greeted arriving guests, it's thought to symbolize life's quest for wholeness and a return to our divine source.
The ancient religion of Babylon, they all have one thing in common: the sacred feminine. The sacred feminine. The sacred feminine. Ishtar the Babylonians, Tyre the Buddhism, Fatima of Muhammad, Sophia the Gnostics, Shekinah to the Kabbalist Jew, Mary to the Catholic, and Shakti to the Hindu. These all have one thing in common: the sacred feminine. And the sacred feminine is going to take you back to the source of light, because the light that resides in that place that Plato talked about, you need a path to get back to that light. Listen, this is important. She is the one to take you to that light. Now, I'm gonna give you a guess. Tell me this morning, who do you think that light is? You remember what this subject's all about? Lucifer. He's the light bearer.
That's what this is, you know. Satanic black magic. Sick shit.
Others have pointed to the disturbing dolls that decorated the tables as a nod to human sacrifice. But there is no evidence to back these claims. It's no coincidence, however, that actress Marisa Berenson, who attended the dinner, would later be cast in Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. Nor is it happenstance that the director filmed his own masked ball at the Rothschilds' Mentmore Towers property in Buckinghamshire for his final film Eyes Wide Shut, which contains eerie echoes of the 1972 ball. End quote. These pictures actually look quite similar to ones I've seen more recently. They involve spirit cooking and a woman who I'm not allowed to mention. I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about. Put her name in the comments for someone who might not be aware. Now, it's clear that something very strange happened that night, but unless some whistleblower comes forward or some other piece of evidence is found, it seems we are left to wander the halls of our imagination, looking for connections that may or may not exist. But what do you think about these photos? Is this a real Illuminati ball? Please leave a comment below with your thoughts on this. I'm curious to hear what you think. I want to thank everyone for watching this video, and until next time, God bless you all.
There was a high level of technology that was used that's also going to be used in our age, but that's my theory. There's other kind of theories around this. J.R. Church talked about the bloodline of the Antichrist and the tribe of Dan. Other people tried to figure out, but bottom line is they came back. Somehow the giants were on the earth again, but not in the great numbers that they had been before. This is the Bronze Age, when there's very little of the divinity of the gods from the Greeks' point of view left in humanity, and then finally we enter into the Iron Age. That's the age that we are in now, where there is so little divinity left inside humanity. What do we got to do? We got to create a new breed of humanity. Exactly what the transhumanists are saying now. The mystics of old were saying the same thing. The day will come when we will need to rejuvenate, recalibrate, alter, re-engineer humanity so that once again we can be an offspring of the immortals. But why should Christians care about a Sibyl's prophecy on the Great Seal heralding the return of Apollo? Because the Bible identifies the god Apollo as the same spirit, verified by the same name, that will inhabit the political leader of the end times New World Order. 2 Thessalonians, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. This is the Greek word Apollyon, which is the Greek's way of saying what we call Apollo. Apolia, Apollyon, Apollo. Revelation 17:8 ties the coming of the Antichrist with the return of Apollo. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, Apolia, Apollo. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. This phrase is held by many theologians who believe that it pointed to either a spirit or a personality that existed on the earth, was dead at the time or gone at the time of the writing of Revelation 17:8, but who will return in the latter days to either be or to possess the Antichrist. Both the Bible and ancient records and the prophecy on the Great Seal tell us it is Apollo. He is equivalent to the Egyptians as Osiris. In the Old Testament he is called Nimrod. If we had had time we would have talked about this question, but how could Apollo, Osiris, Nimrod possibly return in flesh or spirit as Antichrist? But it has to do with the Cumae Sibyl's prophecy of a new breed of men, and the same thing that I was talking about. Well, there it is, Genesis 10:8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be, this is the Hebrew halal, which means either ritualistically, he began to change sexually or to change genetically, or it can flatly just refer to the same thing when the Bible refers to all flesh having become corrupted upon the earth. He began to change genetically, and as he did, what did he become? A mighty, a Gibborim in the earth. He immediately sets out to build a tower. His eyes were opened, like we talked about last night, to new modes of perception, what the transhumanists want. Suddenly he saw something. He wanted to build a tower whose top would reach into the heavens. Roosevelt and Wallace believed it. Here's Nicholas Roerich holding the sacred casket. Wallace was a devotee of Nicholas Roerich. I went to the house of the temple. I want to know if there was anything to this, so I went to the lion's den. I had people praying and fasting for me. I took my wife. We went to the house of the temple. We went to the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry in Washington, D.C. on 16th Street, and not on a public tour. We went and met privately with 2 Freemasons of the 33rd degree order. They took us inside. They answered every question except one. I'm going to tell you what that question was. When we went into the sacred room there, the chapel, with its giant altar, and I looked up at the 36-paneled magic 666 square that is used during the raising ceremony to bring forth the spirit of Osiris from the underworld to incarnate him in every U.S. president. When I was standing there, I'm familiar with the raising ceremony. A 32nd degree Freemason becomes a 33rd degree. They go through this process of raising Osiris from the dead to be incarnated within that individual. But what I had been told was that ceremony was secretly conducted at the inauguration of every United States president, beginning posthumously with George Washington and extending through every U.S. president. And when I asked them if that was true, they would not answer that question. One guy got nervous and walked out of the room. The other one just stayed nervous and stood looking at me. And my wife gave me a look like, "Don't press it, buddy." I believe the greatest conspiracy of all time is sitting out in Washington, D.C. It's also here at the Vatican. This is the ancient structural representation of the womb of Isis. This is the ancient structural representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris. Your capital city is laid out as a magical construct based on ancient Egyptian beliefs for the exact purpose of raising Osiris from the dead so that he could be incarnated within every U.S. president. That's the way the city's laid out. It's also laid out that way at the Vatican. Did you know, Noah, that when Pope Sixtus went and they got this obelisk, they took it from the ancient city of Heliopolis, what is called in the Bible the city of On. It was dedicated to Osiris, Isis, and the sun god Ra. And when Sixtus the Pope brought it there, he tried to conduct an exorcism on it to cast the spirit of Osiris out of it before planting it in the center of the Vatican City. All right, there's a reason why the Washington Monument has a magic square in its base where a Bible is bound. There's a reason there's a magic 666 square above that altar in the house of the temple where I was at. There's a reason there are 72 pentagrams. In their Gnosticism, they believe 72 demons control the nations of the earth, and they have bound them at the base of the apotheosis of Washington. This is the underbelly of the U.S. Capitol Dome. It's called the apotheosis of George Washington, which means to become a god. What god did he become? Well, look at the heaven that he's rising into. There's not one Christian symbol. There's no Jesus. There's no cross. There is no Michael the Archangel. Every part of the underbelly of the U.S. Capitol Dome is filled with pagan gods. Here's the god Vulcan, whom Manly P. Hall tells us fills the Freemasons' hands with the seething energies of Lucifer. That's the heaven he went into. At his funeral, Freemasons cast figs of acacia upon his body to represent that he had gone into the underworld to take his role as Osiris so that the next president could become the resurrected Osiris. Well, the occult have a plan. God has a better one.
So what do you think about that presentation I just showed you? Because in my opinion, it's one of the most important presentations I've ever seen. So make sure you share this far and wide. Leave a comment and let us know what you think. Also, don't forget to hit that like button. And until next time.
God, art thou come hither to torment us before the time? And this is the Greek word kairos, which means a fixed time, an epoch that is waited for. In our terminology, we would call it a dispensation. And for you pastors and preachers that are here, there is a fantastic sermon here waiting for you to preach it because, number one, they know something about times and dispensations. Secondly, they knew that that time had not yet arrived. But thirdly, they know when it does arrive, guess what? The King of Kings and the Lord of Glory is going to judge the dead and the living. He is the one that has the power. I could tell you a story of a demoniac that I don't have time to tell. was the only case when I worked with a team of exorcists some decades ago, but it was the only case in which I ever saw actual laws of physics being broken, things that I simply could not understand. A young man running towards us and leapt through the air and hit an invisible wall, literally just slammed into something and hit the ground. But this was the cool part. The minute that happened, there were 40-some people who were standing there. Every single one of them fell to their knees and raised their hands. You know why? Because for the first time in their life, they saw undeniable proof that there is a God in heaven, and seated at his right hand is a man by the name of Jesus Christ, and every principality and power must bow before his authority. These powers know something about times and dispensations. All right, because of those points, they're in the world, they're powerful, they can be persuasive. They are warring to control what decisions that are made by pharaohs, by presidents. Egypt's pharaoh is our president. They are warring for their mind. They want to control them. They want to take them somewhere. They want to take them, obviously, in a direction opposite of what God would have. Either that executive level or even the people of that nation follow. And slowly, either that executive level or even the people of that nation follow. And slowly, the process of gradualism, the drip, 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 where over a slow period of time, we are taking away from preaching the Bible, Pastor Hoggart, that fantastic point you made last night. When you change the DNA, you change the body. And the body in this nation has been changed. The church is dying. We are no longer reaching 25-year-olds and younger have had their worldviews more shaped by Star Wars movies and George Lucas and Hollywood than they have by the church. And so they're persuasive, and that's what they're out to do. They're out to persuade a generation, but of what? And here is a great mystery. I was doing research on something else, and I came across this book, the Book of the Kumiel, the Council Book of the Yucatec Maya. This interested me because the Yucatec Maya had converted to Christianity following the Spanish invasion. And they still technically refer to their prophet as the Chilambalam, but the Chilambalam had converted to Christianity, and the Chilambalam started developing ideas around the Christian final judgment. And he came to believe that the prophets of his culture, who were forecasting a future in which their God would return, was a false setup for the Christ of Christianity and his appearing, and that something was going to precede it. In our theology, we would understand that entirely, wouldn't we? The coming of the Antichrist, a time of great deception. So I came across, this was by the way, this was academic research. The professor here, Richard Luxton, as far as I know, isn't a Christian. He had made himself a friend of the Yucatec Maya, and he was hoping that they would allow him to interpret some of their ancient books into the English language. And so he was doing academic research with the Yucatec Maya. The Maya had written this 500 years ago, and it contains prophecies concerning the future. So I started reading this. Make a long story short, I thought I found something. I thought I found something nobody had ever found before. And I'm not one of these guys, you know, like in the New Testament where they're always running around trying to find some new thing. That's not me. But I thought I came across something, and it was connected to the year 1776, the year 2012. And more importantly, in my mind, it was connected to the founding of this country and the Great Seal of the United States, and a prophecy held by the Freemasons in which they believe that their God is going to return at a future moment in time. That grabbed my interest. But before I said anything about it, I thought, I have stumbled into some deep occult work here. And these guys are scheming something. And whether I believe it or not, they believe it. And because they believe it, it can affect the course of our nation. It can affect the course of law. When you get up among the elite, the power behind the power. The president stands up and gives a State of the Union address, but it's written by somebody else. And there are people behind him that are fashioning his words, like George Bush standing up and twice in his State of the Union referring to the angel in the whirlwind.
But because we...
And with my background in exorcism, what are these spirits up to? What are they doing? What do they believe? Since spirits know something, both the good ones and the bad ones seem to know something about dispensations, what are they plotting? That's what this kind of started turning in my head, based on partly what I'll show you again in a moment from the book of the Kumiel. But so I decided, all right, I'm going to do a little bit of research. There's also a series called The Lost Symbol Found, which was when Dan Brown came out with his book, The Lost Symbol, talking about a Bible that is hidden in the base of the Washington Monument. We spent 6 hours explaining why there is a Bible that is bound in a stylized magic 666 square in the base of the Washington Monument, and what that mysticism means from their own Masonic writings. So in any case, something began emerging to me, and I was curious about it. I'm Curious George, I'm Curious Tom. That's me. Always been kind of a stinker as a little boy, and when somebody said don't go there, I went, oh, see what I just did? I cross. And don't think that I haven't been spanked by God plenty of times, so you don't need to come up and rebuke me. In any case, I thought a pattern was emerging, so I kept digging. I found Monument 6 in Tortuquero, Mexico. And Monument 6 tells us that when that moment arrives, their underworld god, Bolonyakteku, is going to return, followed by 9 support gods that represent the planets in our planetary system. And I don't know where Noah went, but Noah, it sounds just like they're describing an invasion of Earth, like a giant UFO, because all of a sudden something descends very rapidly upon the earth. Is that going to happen? I don't know, but I know that the Bible tells me men's hearts are going to fail them for fear for seeing those things that are coming upon the earth. And there is a time of great deception and a time of lying wonders that could cause the world to accept what? An intergalactic Messiah, the return of the gods, the return of the Sumerian gods, something that could be extraordinary, beyond our comprehension, that could cause the masses of the world to panic and fall down in subservience to what we think of as the coming of the Antichrist. Anyway, that's what Monument 6 says. So I started looking into other cultures. I wanted those. It's just Mesoamerican. I found out that the Hindus had focused on the same thing in the Hindu Kali Yuga calendar. This is the age of the male demon, and they too saw that the earth would go through catastrophic changes. Then I found here in the early Americas, 200 years ago, the Cherokee Indian tribe, in a whole series of apocalyptic prophecies. They too began to prophesy the return of their feathered rattlesnake god. These are called the Cherokee Star Constellation prophecies, or more commonly the Cherokee Rattlesnake prophecies. And here's another thing for you investigators that like looking into this stuff. I want somebody to answer me why all of these cultures want to typify their god as a great dragon that has the power of flight, has the power to move through the air. The Bible talks to me too about a power of the air, and also refers to him as a dragon. And all of these cultures, the Cherokee see a flying rattlesnake god who's going to return. The Mayans see Kukulkan. The Aztecs see Quetzalcoatl, their feathered serpent god coming back from the heavens. And furthermore, as you'll see in a moment, on the Great Seal of the United States, the prophecy on the Great Seal speaks of the return of the god Saturn's reign over the earth and his son Apollo upon the earth. And if you look at ancient depictions of Saturn, he is pulled in his chariot through the sky by 2 winged dragons. All of this occultism. So I went back to Luxton's book, this interpretation of a 500-year-old prophecy, the book of the Kumiel. Now, let me just real quickly, because I really got some stuff here I want to be able to say, and so I'll move through this part quickly. The point that grabbed me in this was that the Maya had recognized a direct link between the number 13, which is so important to our country, 1776 and 2012, in cycles and illustrations in a way that academic Luxton thought mirrored prophecies of the Christian Last Judgment. They mirrored prophecies of the Christian Last Judgment because the Chilam Balam had become a convert of Christianity, and he was speculating about what does all this Mayan stuff mean to him now as a Christian. It is pointing towards the coming of a judgment that is defined in the scriptures, in which there is going to be a clash between the powers of paganism and the powers of God. When I read the Mayan translation by Luxton, here's what struck me. These elements. The final 13-step countdown of the Mayan calendar began in the year 1776, followed by 13 steps, ending with the return of their God. The minute that I read that, I said, that's describing the symbolism on the Great Seal, where in Roman numerals you have 1776, you have a 13-stepped uncapped pyramid, and numerous American historians have told us that those steps represent periods of time over which is this ominous eye of Apollo. known to the Egyptians as Osiris, known to the Sumerians as Gilgamesh, known in the Old Testament as Nimrod. And that too is verified by all of the best academic work of the Freemasons as well as American historians. That's not a disputable fact, and it's not Tom Horn's opinion. That's what that eye represents. Combined here with the statement Anuet Coeptus and the prophecy Novus Ordo Seclorum. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So my first question was, were the framers of our government, and in particular those esoteric-minded gentlemen who were important to the design and layout of Washington, D.C., and iconic things such as the Great Seal of the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, there were Christians in the founding of our country, and especially at the common level, as a result of the Pilgrim movement. This was a Christian nation. This was a nation filled with Christians. But there were also among the leaders of this nation those who belonged to the secret orders. That too is a fact. And especially those who were responsible for the design and layout of Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, you can go to our government's own website and read about the contest that was initiated for the design of Washington, D.C. and look at what our government records tell us about the different architectural firms who offered different kind of designs for Washington, D.C., and then read on our government website about how Thomas Jefferson didn't prefer any of them, rejected all of them. Why? Our records say because he wanted the U.S. Capitol to reflect the Roman pantheon, and it even says in our government records, dedicated to all pagan gods. That's what they wanted. So that's what they shepherded, and that's what they got, and that's why you have a dome and an obelisk, and if we have time, we'll talk about that's why D.C. is laid out the way it is. That's why these elements made it onto the Great Seal of the United States. Well, what I wanted to know is, were these same mystical-minded gentlemen, were they aware of the beliefs of the Maya and the beliefs of the Aztec? Were they aware of it? And if they were aware of it, did they incorporate it into their belief system? And especially, did they incorporate it into the symbolism of the Great Seal and other important elements of Washington, D.C.? That's what I wanted to know, because I thought if I could find concrete evidence that in fact they were aware of it, and in fact that they incorporated it into their belief system, it might raise my suspicion about the design on the Great Seal, right? So to make a long story short, let me tell you a little story.
We ought to praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah. We ought to praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah, right here. We ought to praise God. Let's count our blessings. Let's count our lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah.